So it's a panel discussion. We've got a number of questions for the panel regarding their careers to date and their advice to students who are interested in a career in science. And to start with, I'm going to ask questions on your behalf, ask questions of the panel, and after that there'll be time for you to ask some questions. So please have a think as we go through if there's anything that you would like to know or anything particular that you would like to ask. We'll try to get through as many as possible. If there are questions left at the end, if you just come and have a chat to me, we'll see if we can find out a way for them to get answered, sort of offline, as it were. I should note that this session is being recorded, so it can be watched again later, and the links to all the sessions will be shared by email later in the week. So without further ado, rather than me introducing the panelists to you, I'm going to put them on the spot, and I'm going to give each of you 30 seconds, please, just to sort of give me your name, where you're working at the moment. Obviously, they're all GSAL alumni, so they have been here, but where are you now? And, in 30 seconds, what is it you do? So, Clinton, would you like to start us off, please?
Sure. So my name is Clinton. I just set up a research lab down in the University of Oxford Department of Biochemistry, and we're interested in a parasite that causes malaria. Specifically, we're wondering how, from a structural perspective, the weapons that the malaria uses to invade and infect red blood cells as part of infection, how they work and what they look like.
Brilliant, thank you. Harren.
Yeah, hi there, folks. I'm Harren. I'm actually currently in a bit of a year out. I'm working in publishing, but I'm going to be going down south to do a master's in neuroscience. And the kind of neuroscience I'm interested in is the bit of the intersection between sleeping and dreaming and memory. So how does memory affect our sleep and dreams, and how do sleep and dreams affect memory? That's kind of me.
Brilliant. And Helen.
Hi, I'm Helen. I'm currently in the very last stages of my PhD at the University of Leicester, where I have hundreds of heart failure patients from around Leicestershire, and I investigate what things in their blood give away the fact that they have heart failure, how well they do, and their survival. And actually, in a week's time, I moved to the US to start my first job after my PhD.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So you'll probably have noticed that we've got all biological scientists here. As a physicist, I'm really grateful for the sort of simple language you all used explaining your research, because quite often the scientific language can be very technical. But I think the principles we're going to be discussing today are applicable to biological sciences or physical sciences, and actually increasingly the boundaries between the different sciences are broken down. It's not all compartmentalized like it is at school. So hopefully you'll be able to see this morning how sort of science as a whole feeds into what's done here, and it's not just biology or something you can easily put into a tin. So what I'd like to explore a little bit now is your journey from GSAL to what you're doing now. And let's start with Harren, because I understand that you switched from a medical degree to pursuing neuroscience in research. Would you like to say a little bit about what's taken you from GSAL to where you are?
Sure. So after GSAL, I, like a lot of people, went off to the University of Edinburgh to study medicine, which was fun. But I kind of always was more theoretically minded, let's say. I was much more interested in science rather than applications of science. And I kind of found myself at med school feeling a little bit maybe dissatisfied by the kind of work that we were doing. Medicine's a fantastic career, and indeed most of my friends are still medics. But if you're more interested in discovery or working slightly more theoretically, then potentially science is more for you. So if you're interested in medicine, often you can intercalate, you can spend a year doing another degree. I did neuroscience for that. I was very fortunate to work with some great professors. After that, I was sufficiently inspired to make a jump and decide not to do medicine anymore. And I've had a great time since. It's exactly what I imagined it would be.
So what do you plan to do next?
Right, yes. So I described kind of the field that I'm interested in, and I have accrued a decent amount of experience in the sleep side and in the memory side. So I'm going to go down to Cambridge to do my master's, and then hopefully a PhD, but details still being worked out. I'm hoping to be a neuroscientist and build a career around that field.
Brilliant. So Harren's very much at sort of the start of the scientific research process after his undergraduate degree, about to begin a master's. Helen, you've nearly finished your PhD, which is a step further. So would you like to tell us a little bit about what's led you to want to do a PhD, and perhaps then a little bit more about the research you're doing?
Yeah, so when I was at the end of my time at school, I put in 4 medical applications and I threw in Biomed at Birmingham as a sort of backup, that it was my favourite medical school, and that would be a good option if I didn't get in. And I think in hindsight, I probably didn't get into medical school because my personal statement probably wasn't that convincing, because it wasn't what I genuinely wanted to do. And so I went off to Birmingham and did Biomed and loved it. I loved the time in the lab and the research questions, and going from sort of the experiments you do at school that you can fit into like a 50-minute lesson to like 6-hour days, maybe coming back 3 days in a row and really like getting involved in something. My first proper experience of research was like a summer placement between 2nd and 3rd year of my degree, and I went and spent 12 weeks in a lab that investigated this bacteria that's linked with stomach cancer. And that was my first real experience of like independent research every single day, sort of 9 to 5. And I loved it. I loved the environment. And I started putting in PhD applications and master's applications when I finished in Birmingham, so it would have been the summer of 2019. And I got this place at Leicester. And yeah, I've loved it, and I love doing research, and I want to keep on doing research. So the lab in Leicester, we use mass spec, which I know is briefly mentioned in chemistry at school. And like you said, biology and chemistry is, you know, they're so separate at school, but they are so intertwined when you get to like a research career, that I need to know biology to understand heart failure and understand the blood and things like that. But actually I need to know chemistry to use the mass spec equipment. And so my job in the US, I'm taking that mass spec experience, but actually it's quite exciting that I get to move into a new field, and the lab out there, they actually research ovarian cancer. So that's new to me. That's new biology, but I feel secure in that I know how to use the mass spec. So it's some familiarity. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. And Clinton, for those who don't know, Clinton has said he was just starting his research group, and actually in scientific terms, this is a really big deal. It's sort of the first time as a scientist when you can actually feel, I think you've got a little bit of job security, and that you feel that you have made it, at least to some extent. So Clinton, perhaps you can talk us through your journey from sort of when you were early on in research to actually managing to set up your own group.
Yeah, I think I did always know from school that I wanted to research sort of at the interface between biology and chemistry, with a little bit of physics too. I spent a lot of my undergrad and PhD and postdoc getting fascinated into how the many tiny molecular machines that we have in our body, how they work, how they move, and what they look like. And I think at the transition, so after a PhD, I did a postdoc similar to what Helen's going to do soon. And during my postdoc, I really got interested in how the machines I was working on in my postdoc, which were from humans, how they worked in the malaria parasite. Because in all of the vast tree of life, many of these machines are conserved, but many of them we don't actually know how they work in non-human organisms. And so that's really what led to my push to sort of get some funding to set up my own group.
Brilliant. So what does it involve then, setting up your own group? You've mentioned funding.
A lot of paperwork. I think really it starts with the idea. So if you have the idea, you can then go and chat and collaborate with a lot of scientists to discuss how good your idea is, how fundable it is, and sort of develop this idea into something that the funding bodies will look like. In the UK, 3 or 4 funding bodies that you can then apply to for money, and that application process takes about a year. You put in a very detailed application of the experiments that you do, also a plan on the sort of lab and lab environment you'd like to set up, and then you get interviewed. And I was very fortunate to pass that interview stage and get awarded money for 8 years.
Brilliant. And then you're awarded this money, but you still need to find a university to host you.
That's right, yeah. No, I did a little bit of scouting for universities. Because the techniques that I wanted to use, so firstly I wanted to grow the malaria parasite, which we do in very controlled labs, of course. And secondly, I wanted to use electron microscopes, which really allow us to see the structure of proteins. There are very few places around the UK that have both of these facilities, so that restricted me somewhat. But yeah, I had to talk to different universities to see who would be interested in taking me on as a junior research leader.
I'm aware we've used the term research group quite a lot, and I mean all of you either have been or will be at various times. part of different research groups, which all have different structures. But Clinton, perhaps you could tell us roughly what we mean by a research group.
So research, generally speaking, is organized into distinct research groups or labs, and each lab will tackle, I guess they'll have a common theme. Some labs are more broad than others, but for example, the lab that I worked at, my postdoc worked on a very specific molecular motor, which transports things in human cells, like up and down your neurons, for example. We all use very similar techniques, and that means that we can talk to each other a lot about the different problems that we're having. But ultimately, I guess each research group is sort of pointing towards the same goal, although there's a bit of flex around that, I guess. Some research groups are much broader.
Brilliant. So we've talked a little bit about how you get to where you are now. And Helen and Harren, both of you mentioned that you're effectively now working in fields you hadn't envisaged when you were at the stage that the students sitting here today are at. So do you think it matters what degree you study? Helen, perhaps you'd like to go first on this.
I think I've come to this from a weird point of view that I kind of hinted at the fact that my biomed degree was my fifth choice. I didn't put much thought into it. I didn't actually look at what that course involved. I went purely on the fact that it was in Birmingham and I quite liked it. And actually, maybe I should have given that some more thought and looked at the modules and how much choice I had, the research opportunities, things like, is it accredited with the Institute of Biomedical Science? Because the one at Birmingham isn't. And that was probably something I should have prioritised. Things like that. I think for me, what I knew at school but didn't realise I knew I wanted to help people. And I just was directing that in the wrong place. I feel a real sense of like achievement and impact with what I do in my PhD. And I think I wrongly thought I'd only ever feel that actually on the front line helping patients as a doctor. And actually almost what my morals and my values maybe would have made, if I'd given them some attention, would have helped me choose the right degree at undergrad.
Brilliant. Harren, what do you think? I mean, do you think it matters that you started out in medicine? Is that going to help you, hinder you?
Just to come back to that, I think the thing, maybe you'll get some proper career advice from these two, but I'm still fairly early on. The thing that I kind of want to get over to you guys is that trusting your gut and doing what you want is probably the thing to do, and overthinking stuff is rarely the right course of action. So if you have, especially in science, curiosity and enthusiasm, you're going to seek out and create opportunities for yourself more than somebody who is doing, say, another degree who's just kind of coasting along. That said, if you do a certain degree, you will be presented with very easily opportunities and skills that you maybe would have to work hard to get otherwise. So in neuroscience, I did final year neuroscience, but I hadn't done 3 years of neuroscience. So it was on me to learn a lot of the things that all the other people knew already. And I enjoyed that because I love neuroscience. I want to do it for the rest of my life. But we've spoken about the increasing interdisciplinary nature of science. And this is a real thing. Like, science is divided for you guys into biology, chemistry, physics, maths. But right now, and I look at science in the next 30 years, it's impossible to think that you are only going to be doing what you currently know to be biology. I've had to learn a lot of computational stuff, like advanced computational stuff. I've had to learn bits of chemistry. Clinton said he did basically all 3 of the sciences in his degree and his work. So yeah, choosing your degree is an important thing. And I wish I'd picked a better degree for what I'm doing now, but it's not the be-all and end-all. And if you're not sure and you want to do science, there are great broad spectrum degrees, natural sciences, biomedicine. They'll give you the exposure to different techniques and different ideas that maybe you should be looking at uni.
Brilliant. So thank you. Same for you, really, Clinton. Sort of doesn't matter what degree you study, but also coming at that from the point of view of someone who's now got your research group, and clearly you're recruiting for master's students and PhD students into your research group. So a little bit for sort of what you're looking at for someone who you want to come and work for you in your research group.
I think, I agree with these two, really. It doesn't matter to an extent. I think really, you've got to follow your interests. For me, I was interested in biochem. Before even going to do a biochemistry degree, I knew I liked biology, but I didn't like parts of it. I knew I liked chemistry, but I didn't like parts of it. And so I talked to a teacher here, and then he said, you might want to look at biochemistry because you're really interested in the molecular basis of life. And that's what I did, and it kept me focused all the way through the degree and kept me interested, ultimately. Now, from a group leader's point of view, I think what's more important is the skills that you have and that you learn through your degree. Particularly, having enthusiasm is absolutely essential. Learning how best you learn and pick up new skills for yourself is also crucial, because that's, as a scientist, every month or so, I'm looking at a new technique that I might use in my research project. And so being able to try and study this from papers, maybe go chat to some people, and then learn whether it will be useful for me, I think is a good skill to have. I think also being open-minded. But these are skills in any degree you can sort of coach along, I suppose.
Brilliant, thank you. So what I want to do now is probe a little bit more about what you actually do when you are doing scientific research, because we've said that it's very different from school. But I want us to explore a little bit how it actually differs from school, how your time in the lab is very different. Any volunteers starting us off?
Absolutely. So, like I said, I'm currently at the end of my PhD. So actually my current daily routine is sitting down and trying to write my thesis, which isn't the most exciting part of being a scientist, but only something I'll have to do once, thankfully. In the midst of my PhD, I am incredibly independent in the sense that it's very independent and it's on you to get the work done, which is sometimes hard. You have to have a lot of motivation. But like I said, so we use mass spec to study these patients, 700 patients across Leicester. And a typical day for me might be troubleshooting with the mass spec. It might be more wet lab things that you might be more familiar with, like actually pipetting and moving things from place to place. Or it could be a lot of data analysis. It could be making a presentation to take to a conference. It's really, really varied. And actually, these last few weeks doing nothing but my thesis have been the first time in the whole 4 years that I've only had one task to be focusing on, because normally there's loads of things going on and it's collaborative, and yeah, it's just really nice and varied, and it kind of has busy phases and other times it doesn't. You might be doing an experiment for 9 hours of the day, one day, and then the next day you can kind of ease off a bit and the mass spec's chugging away and you're getting the data off at a nice pace and things like that. But yeah, I think it's just incredibly varied, which is lovely. It never gets boring.
So 2 things I want to pick up there. You mentioned sort of some long days doing experiments, sort of 9-hour days.
Yeah.
What are your typical working hours?
Like I said, so it's incredibly independent. I haven't taken a day off to come here do this. I'm in charge of my own time. I might make it up tomorrow. The same with, going to a conference or going to a speech or doing some outreach, like speaking to students. I know myself that I'll make it up on another day, whether that's sometimes a weekend, but equally it's I think I would sacrifice the odd Saturday in the knowledge that I can drop a Wednesday if I've got something else to do, that kind of thing. But normally it's 9 to 5 and it's pretty, I think it's a really good work-life balance, actually.
Brilliant, thank you. What about you, Harren? What's sort of a typical day? How does scientific research differ for you from what you've done at school?
Yeah, I think that's key. It really does differ a lot. The kind of work that we do is with animals. So we do predominantly rodent experiments. And if you're training a rodent in a learning task, you've got to train them every day, including weekends and bank holidays. So there's many people in the lab, so you can split that up how you need to, but fundamentally there is a requirement of someone being there every day. And I think that's true of our stuff and true of like cell culture stuff as well. But I think if you go to the kind of more abstract working day, again, it is extremely varied. I think especially as a junior researcher, you do like a lot of grunt work, which especially at this early stage is actually kind of exciting. And then you have almost like a crescendo to like go to your supervisor and say, look what we've done, and then he'll sit back and go, oh, let's have a think about this, and you have this fun little kind of very Robin Williams style tutorial thing about what's actually going on. But I think the key is variable working hours is quite convenient. It can be quite convenient. As long as the animal gets trained, it gets trained, fab. And of course, there's so much different kinds of research you can do. When I was doing medical research, like it was predominantly database analysis. So I could literally do it I could do it at midnight or I could do it at 8 a.m. It would make no difference. So fairly varied.
Brilliant, thank you. And Clinton, what does your day-to-day look like?
Currently, a lot of paperwork. Yeah. No, I'm filling in. There's a lot of safety involved in how we do science. So currently, I'm filling in the safety paperwork and making sure the protocols that I'm going to use comply with safety regulations. So that's kind of boring. The good thing about my position as a new group leader is I still get to go in the lab a lot, and I'm going to do that as much as possible. And my best days, I'm going to be sat at a microscope finding out something new, something that no one has seen before, and that is really the key thing that has kept me in science. Fascinating. What I would say is that within science research, there is a very large variety in sort of working patterns and working hours. I get the sense that work-life balance is getting a lot better, particularly since the pandemic. People are sort of realizing how to prioritize a bit more and the real value of having a good work-life balance. In academia, I really do think that it's getting better, but variety is key. Yeah, never a dull moment, that's for sure.
Brilliant. I think all of you have mentioned this idea of a scientific conference, and obviously we're at a conference today. We're at the GSAL Futures Conference. But actually scientific conferences are a very exciting part of scientific research, and they're really, really important. So Helen, could you just tell us very briefly what going to a scientific conference entails?
Yeah, so I am flying to San Francisco next Sunday to go to a conference actually to start. I have conveniently tied it on to moving abroad for my job. So I will be flying to San Francisco to attend a conference called Mass Spectrometry and Advances in the Clinical Laboratory, which is in Monterey, California. One of the social activities is going whale watching, so I'm buzzing. And also, it's not cost me anything to go, so that's a great part of the career, that I have written applications to the British Mass Spectrometry Society, the Royal Society of Chemistry, and laid out sort of who I am and the fact that I am at the end of my PhD and I'd like to give this 20-minute talk on this thing that I've found that predicts which of our heart failure patients are really high risk to dying in hospital after their admission. So that I got accepted to the conference to give this 20-minute speech, and then I made these applications to get the money to get me to the conference, and then that will run for a week starting on Monday the 3rd of April, and I'll attend other speeches. With it being mass spec, some will be really sort of physicsy, engineering, the kind of people that love the sort of electronics and physics and computer science that goes into building a mass spec, but there'll also be the people there with their sort of clinical research questions and problems to answer. And it'll be they're really sociable, and I think you'll agree they're fun, and they're good networking opportunities to find jobs and make connections. And actually, my entire move to the US comes off my colleague going to the same conference in April of last year. And she met my now boss who works in Minnesota and just said, look, this woman was lovely. Maybe she's someone you could send an email to about getting a job. I thought she was really nice. I thought her science was interesting. And it was like a sort of, she'd been checked and vetoed for me by one of my good friends, and I trusted her opinion. So, yeah.
Brilliant. So changing tack a little bit, because I'm aware we've got about 5 minutes till we open up to questions from the audience. Harim, what do you think you learned or experienced at school that's been particularly useful in your scientific career so far?
Yeah, there's lots of very specific lessons that individual teachers have taught me, attention to detail, bigger picture stuff. But I think also the main thing is I think there was a fair bit of inspiration and acceptance of enthusiasm, and the kind of idea of how important it is to work through a problem, break it down, which is literally what we do every day. It's what you practice in your lessons, and if you're interacting properly with them, you can have this kind of theoretical approach to science and an experimental one. And I think what the school did, what I enjoyed at school was having opportunities, genuine opportunities to be enthusiastic and try new things and stuff like that.
Brilliant, thank you. Clinton, what skills, experience and qualities do you think that sort of scientific research is really looking for in a student in a researcher?
I think we've touched on a lot of them over the course of this interview. So definitely willingness and ability to learn is key. Enthusiasm is definitely key in science. Being able to work as part of a team, and I spent a lot of time trying to overcome my own shyness, actually, to be able to reach out to new people who I didn't know and form new connections, which really drive as a human race, our research forward, because, no person researches in their own little island. We need to make those connections. I think those are the key ones. I don't know if you missed any.
I think the only one I'd add would be resilience. because as much as we're painting a really good picture of it, I think we've probably all had experiences in our research career where I think the first time it happened for me was in that bacteria project at undergrad, and sort of, going home like, I've done a good day's work tomorrow, that'll be set me up for what I want to do tomorrow. Coming in, opening the incubator, and either no bacteria had grown, or I'd grown the bacteria that were on my own hands as opposed to the one I was actually trying to study, things like that. And you just have to sort of maybe have a strop for 5 minutes and then repeat exactly what you did the day before. And it's that tenacity sometimes is essential to get you through certain periods.
I think that's very, very true. But I think it's very clear from what you've said that you've all got this enthusiasm and this drive and this passion for the research which you're doing. And I think a lot of it comes from finding the right research area that you don't mind putting in the hours for, or actually you can see that even though there's a problem, it's worth overcoming because the result is what is worth the journey. So finally, before we open up for questions, what one thing do you wish you'd known or someone had told you when you were in year 10 or year 12 and thinking about what you were going to do? Harren, do you want to?
Okay. One thing. Yeah. I think probably the thing that would have pushed me to do science would have been to know what neuroscience was. I'm not actually sure that I knew. I think I knew what neuroanatomy was. Different regions of the brain do different things, but I didn't understand the spectrum of kinds of science that there are, and how that they were actually very accessible to me. So the way that I guess you guys can start to try and understand these questions is just by reading. Watching documentaries are quite good. YouTube videos is a good resources, and maybe slightly understanding that the subjects that you do, chemistry, biology, maths, physics, are not really what they are in the professional sense.
Brilliant, thank you. Helen?
I don't know. There's something really exciting about the fact that if you're sat here and you're thinking of putting an application in for the sort of biochem, biology, biomed, there's something quite exciting about having no idea where that will take you, because I hated chemistry at school, but mass spec is strictly speaking chemistry. I dropped cardiovascular science as a module at Biomed. I do a PhD in heart failure, and now I'm moving to the US to study ovarian cancer. And I think there's something really exciting in the fact that I've not been able to predict any of it, but it's all kind of fallen into place. So yeah, take that leap of faith with that science degree, because I think I loved the fact that medicine was tied to a career. I was like, fine, don't need to make any decisions, wonderful. But that leap of faith that you don't know what your passion is, and that's really exciting.
And I think something that's coming out is it's actually as much the skills that you learn from doing the science degree and the ability to think and the process of doing real science is what you get out of the degree. Then actually, as Harren was saying, you can learn the extra little bits you need for the field you end up in later with those skills. So Clinton, what do you wish you'd known?
Similar to Harren, actually, just what different science disciplines involve. And I think I'd like to add, as well as, documentary, great to have a watch. A lot of universities and scientific institutes run open days. They go to science fairs, and at these sort of events, you can speak to people who do research, and you can get an idea of lots of different research questions, exciting things that they're looking at. So I would do that, and I didn't do that during my time at school, and I wish I had, I think.
Brilliant. So, questions. Excellent. Do I take the microphone up? Can you shout? Brilliant. Great question. So what were your A-level choices and how did that affect your opportunities to get where you are now? Harren, why don't you start? That was most recent.
Sure. I did a very classic combination of chemistry, biology, maths. And how did that affect where... this is actually something I considered, because I thought... The thing that made me want to do science was I read a book called Life on the Edge by Jim Al-Khalili and John J. McFadden, which is about quantum biology. And I thought, and at the end, there's this whole bit about consciousness and quantum consciousness. And I thought, this is what I want to do. I didn't realize at the time that what I was interested in was the brain. I thought I was interested in quantum biology. So I was like, oh God, I got to do physics, but it's too late. Am I never going to be able to study the brain? Little did I know that neuroscience existed. So obviously you have to make a decision I made a decision to not do physics, but science is sufficiently interdisciplinary, if it is science you're talking about, that you can get around things. The one thing I will say that was great about my A-levels, I did the EPQ, and that is a fantastic way of doing some of your own research, like a great way of doing it. if I may say, the process is a bit mundane, but the project itself is fantastic, I think.
I think as an EPQ supervisor, I can completely agree with you that one. Harry and Clinton, what about you? What about your A-levels?
I did biology, chemistry, maths, but I also did RS. And I'll bring this in because RS I took as an essay subject. And a lot of my degree at Oxford was writing essays. And I didn't at the time know very well how to write essays. I think RS helped me a little bit with that because, learning how to put together an essay versus a scientific manuscript that we get published, they have a lot of things in common. So I did appreciate that.
Brilliant. And Helen?
I did the exact same, biology, but there is biology, chemistry, maths. I would want to add though, I think this is so important. In my lab at Leicester, we're all PhD students, and you have got it varies on a theme of sort of biomed, biology, chemistry, but you have got people that did their undergrad at Imperial. You've got me who went to Birmingham. I've got friends from Sheffield, Hallam, De Montfort, Leicester, and I think you can appreciate that those universities are going to have different entrance requirements to get onto their undergrad degrees, but ultimately, all five of us are in the exact same position now. So I wouldn't want any of you to sit there and think, I don't have the grades for a Russell Group University for an undergrad degree at science, or I'm struggling in my science A-levels, and think that this is closed off to you, because, it's definitely not.
Yeah.
I would chime in there and say, as a now group leader, I don't really look at the university that the person who's coming to my lab went to. What's much more important is the skills they bring.
So some really, really important comments there. Right, other questions? Yes, Hugo. Can I just clarify the question, Hugo? You're asking if they'd gone to a different sixth form, might that have affected where they are now with their jobs? Okay, so do you think that attending GSAL sixth form in particular had a specific impact on where you ended up?
Yeah, I can only think of a positive of GSAL sixth form. Obviously, it's impossible to say, but I very much enjoyed going here. I'm lots of great teachers. So, I loved it. So that's it.
I guess it's hard to talk about what you'd have done somewhere you didn't go. Brilliant. Interesting thought. Right, other questions? Any other questions? Yes.
Can you do a type of research alongside with doing medicine? So going to maybe start off doing medicine, but going into doing research.
Okay, so can you start off studying medicine and go into research at the same time? So I think this is closely linked to the intercalation, which Harren talked about a little. So do you want to explain a little bit more about maybe how a medicine degree is structured and what opportunities there are for research within it?
There are great opportunities for research in medicine. In fact, to be a successful medic, it is an expectation that you do research. And yes, the intercalation, if anybody's not aware, is a year that you basically go off and do another degree for a year, and you actually get essentially a degree in that. That's the degree that I'm working off now.
So not all universities do that, I should just add.
So not all universities do the intercalation, but if you are at a university that doesn't, or even if you are at a university that do, you can apply and do an intercalation at another university. I think they tell you it's quite competitive. I don't know anybody who's applied for an intercalation at another uni and hasn't got one. I think it's fairly doable. And as I said, it's an expectation if you're a successful doctor. Obviously, if you want to be a doctor and don't do research, absolutely fine. But that you do some research. The kind of research you do is probably different. You can do a PhD and you can do some very, very fundamental biology. But there is a bit of an expectation, I found this, and this is probably right, that you should be doing something translational. Translational is taking basic science and applying it to the patient world. Because you're a doctor, that's what you're there for. So you are a little bit penned down. And like I say, if you have been studying medicine for 6 years and have worked as a doctor, you won't have the techniques that someone who's been doing science for that same amount of time has. So I probably question whether I would be able to make this transition if I hadn't done a lot of other kinds of science. So yes, you absolutely can and should do research as a medic, but there's a fundamental difference in the kind of research you'll probably do.
And I think it's also the case, I know it's also the case that at the junior doctor stage on rotations, you can opt for sets of clinical placements which include a research rotation. So you do have that option there. Right, the year 12 side of the hall has been remarkably silent with the questions. And this is perhaps more pressing for you. So can we have a question from year 12? Anyone got queries about what the best course for them to study is, or questions about motivation for science, or things learned for school? Anyone not sure about anything? You're all completely happy with everything in your A-level courses and everything to do with UCAS? Yes.
Yeah, so a very good question. So essentially what we're trying to do is set up kind of parameters for different behaviors in a rat, or try and examine these parameters in a rat and then apply them to what we kind of experimental psychology, is the study of human behaviors, patterns of human behaviors. So say I was to do an experiment in a rat and I put an electrode in their brain and I was able to model the electrical activity while they're asleep. And then I was to do a similar kind of experiment, not with an electrode in their brain, but electrode recordings in a human. I would be trying to look for similarities between the human and the rat. And the benefit is I can ask the human about dreams. I can't ask the rat about dreams, but I can model the rats. I can do operations on the rat. I can knock out bits of the rat's brain. So the rat allows us to examine very specific things, whereas the human allows us to look at the consciousness side of it. So that's why I'm working in the intersection between. I am doing a similar kind of experiment in two things, and I'm trying to see what is the same and different in these patterns of electrical activity. Does that make sense? Is that well explained?
Other questions? Yes.
I know you guys all said that like each day is different. You can imagine yourselves doing what you were doing sort of when you were at our stage, but it's like at this point right now, what do you think you'll end up doing, like sort of in the end?
Great question. So where do you see your careers going from here? Clinton, should we start with you? What's next?
Well, so hopefully I've got 8 years now, that's what my funding came with, to sort of set up my own research group and really get some momentum behind my research. At the moment, I'm sort of purely a research scientist, but as I go up this sort of career tree, I suppose I'll be taking on teaching responsibilities at universities, and that's hopefully what I'll be doing, lectures and tutorials to the next generation to sort of talk to them about, and hopefully that's a long-term plan. I have other plans like plan B, plan C, plan D, but that's plan A.
Brilliant. So Helen, you're heading off to the States for a postdoctoral position. So perhaps you can tell us briefly what a postdoctoral position is and then where you hope that's going to take you.
So I'm obviously going off to the States, and Clinton's spoken a little bit about his 8 years of funding. There's obviously always a sort of time constraint on jobs in academia, that there's money for a set amount of time. So I'm moving to the US knowing that I have a job for 3 years, maybe a fourth year, but that's as much as I'll get, and I can't just see it as sort of infinite. So that postdoc position, I will continue to do research and publish papers and attend conferences, and maybe hopefully get to the point where I can return to the UK or stay out there and start to be at the point that Clinton's at and have my own research group. But I am open to leaving academia for industry, so doing science for the companies that you know of, like your AstraZenecas and GlaxoSmithKline and people like that, or mass spec companies obviously will have jobs that I could apply for. My reason for doing that would probably come down to job security, because they would offer me a job with a salary that has no end date. Obviously, I don't want to do it forever, and people move and things like that. But the fact that it exists indefinitely is a lot of security to do other things, plan other parts of your life, like buying a house or living in one city forever, as opposed to constantly moving.
And I think that's a really important point. We've talked about the fact that studying science at university leading to scientific research, but there's actually the point that doing scientific research, whether at master's level, PhD level, or even as a postdoctoral student, doesn't mean that you're stuck in scientific research forever. You've got all these skills, you've got all these qualities, which make you highly employable. Clinton?
I just wanted to touch on a little bit. So yes, there is an after a career in scientific research. Many people go on to do things like scientific communications. They're trying to educate other people and and the public about the science that they do. There's also opportunities in the editing world, editing the scientific publications that we all publish our research to as well. So there is a sort of variety of careers that you can go to after doing a science degree. It's not just research scientist, although that's what I love, of course.
Brilliant. And Harry, you're about to start a PhD. Master's, and then after that.
I wish, yeah. And after that, one of the things that I've learned over my slightly up and downy university career is I don't want to plan too far ahead. In a general rule, I would love to follow these two and their career paths. But I've learned that doing what's right for me in like a period of the next 2 years kind of thing is the best. That said, I would love to be a full-time researcher. I work for a company at the moment. Oh God, I really hope this thing didn't go too public, but I work for a company at the moment, and I really don't like working for a company. I find, and maybe I'm still a bit greener than these guys, but I just find it kind of cringe to be fundamentally caring about money and market share and these kind of metrics. So I would love to be part of something slightly more, call it fundamental, going forward.
Brilliant. Something you've said is you're doing a master's before a PhD, but something some of you will have noticed, particularly year 12, with your applications to university courses, is that sometimes you do a master's as part of an undergraduate degree, which would then lead you straight into scientific research. But I think I'm right in saying that's perhaps less common in the biological sciences and in the physical sciences to jump straight into a PhD.
Yeah, I didn't do a master's. I put in 6 or 7 PhD applications in the last year of my PhD that I didn't even get interviewed for. And I knew I wasn't as competitive as the people going for them with masters. I think when it came to the project that I applied for, I did my 3rd year dissertation using mass spec, and then they probably read my application and thought she knows what a mass spec is, and that maybe put me to the top of the list. But it can be done to not have to do a master's, but equally it's another year to find out your passions, to experience another university, a different environment. And some people stay in their master's lab for their PhD. So I guess it's a year of checking that's an environment you do want to commit to for 4 years of your life.
Brilliant. Isabella, did you have a question?
Are there any kind of regrets that you have, like, on decisions that you've made? And what kind of advice would you give someone who's not sure about a decision that they've made, like a course that they've gone on?
Okay, so that's a really good sort of last set of questions. So any regrets you have in your scientific career so far, an advice you'd give to students who perhaps have offers from universities and aren't sure which one to choose. Clinton, would you like to start us off this time?
Okay, regrets. I think Helen's done a really good thing in actually taking the opportunity to go to the US for a postdoc. I think get as much experience you can of different environments, different labs, sort of down the academic track is a really good idea. So that's probably my biggest regret so far, but it's not done me too wrong, I suppose. In terms of advice, I think I would have a look at what the courses offer as much as you can and see which aligns with your interests. It depends on precisely, I guess, on which courses you've chosen, whether they're all the same subject or whether they're different. But I think that's what I would do, because I didn't when I went to Oxford to study biochemistry, and I perhaps should have done.
Brilliant. Helen?
I think one that really stands out to me, having done my undergrad at Birmingham and then being around undergrads at Leicester, is, and this is specific to if you've picked a science undergrad, when it comes to your dissertation, how does that university handle it? Because at Birmingham, January of my 3rd year, I was left in a lab for 3 months to do science every day, and I absolutely loved it. And that was a real experience where I could say, this is for me, and I'm confident in that decision. At Leicester, they make you turn up to lectures the entirety of 3rd year, and then at some point in that week find time to go to the lab. So when I'm supervising undergrads, I'll be like, when am I seeing you next? And they'll be like, Thursday at 3. And it's because they've got lectures to attend and assignments to do. And I just wonder how they decide they want a career in research when they've never done a 9 to 5 week in a research lab. So that would just be one thing that I've seen when you're looking at a science degree. Do they let you have that uninterrupted experience of research, or do they make you juggle it with other things?
And Aaron?
Yeah, I guess the question for me is, do I regret doing medicine? I really don't think so at all. I had a great time, met loads of fantastic people, and like I say, I didn't really know the spectrum of science when I was going in, so it actually helped me very quickly filter through a lot of science, because you have to as medicine, as a medic. But I think it was the right decision, given all the stuff. Probably the only regret that I have is I probably, and this is very easy to say in retrospect, but probably a bit too stressed about the university period, university application period when I was in sixth form. I think I potentially let it affect like other studies and things like that, when actually, keep talking about going with your gut is probably the thing to do. As for advice, if you're not sure about deciding, there is a lot of kind of reading that you can do and that would be kind of accessible to you. Even at your level, especially at the sixth form level, once you've done a little bit of science at A level. If you go and if you Google, like, if you're talking about something broad and you look up the first year topics that you're going to be taught, if you're just deciding between two courses, and look up like a review in and then the topic, and you'll get some kind of fairly complicated document, a bit of scientific research. But if you just try and get your head around that and see if you find the introduction cool, and when I was struggling to read papers as a sixth former, just take it to your biology or chemistry or physics teacher, and they'll help you with it. And if you find that review cool, the introduction of that review cool, then it's a good indication that you'll enjoy learning about it and maybe contributing to it in the future.
Brilliant. Thank you all for your concentration and your really insightful questions. And thank you too for our three wonderful panelists. You have really shared your passion and enthusiasm for science, and I must say it makes me want to be right back in a scientific lab rather than here, however wonderful we all know that GSAL is. But thank you very, very much for giving up of your time and for everything you've had to say, and for your candor as well. That's really, really appreciated, and I can just see how what you're doing in your scientific careers motivates you, and how it really is hopefully making a difference to everyone, to all of us, to society, to the world, to our lives. So thank you very much from us all.